Why don't you turn, if you would, into your Bibles, into the book of Philippians. And wonderful. Thank you, Matt and team, for leading so well there. That's lovely. I want to talk this morning about the practicing church, And as we do that, we're going to be looking a little bit at the ideas of simplicity and some of those things. So I want to invite you to make an act of simplicity, if that's something you'd like to do, and join me by taking off your shoes and socks. So, if you're freaked out, if you're the sort of person, your shoes and socks, you go, ooh, then it's okay, there's plenty of air in here, we're good. If you're still in here and you're under 18, keep them on. But you can do that, just an act of simplicity, which the early church, go right back to Moses. Take off your shoes. The place you're standing is holy ground. I've been experimenting with having no shoes, and I find it puts the dance back in your step. You can't dance. We put men in these great big work boots and wonder why they clump around, and you take off your shoes, and all of a sudden you've got a dance back in your step. I'm not going to ask you to do that. It's okay. But you might like to just do that. And also, you put your nice cot on that nice cool floor. It's like being on holiday, isn't it? Scrunch your toes up a little bit. It's exciting, isn't it? Okay. A question that often rises when you're in ministers' fraternals and stuff. People often, one of the first questions people ask, they sort of ask it in a roundabout way because they don't want to actually ask the question. But what they're really doing is they say, you're obviously a minister, you're here. They want to ask the question, how big's your church? Now, I don't know no other sector where that's true. I don't know whether you sit down as businessmen and say, so what do you do? Oh, I'm a businessman, I'm a businesswoman. All right, how big's your office? I'm sure that's not kind of what, and I find that totally irrelevant. So I normally sort of say, well, we just got a handful of people. And try and avoid the subject because we tend to judge each other and judge people according to those sort of criteria, which is a crazy way of judging people because it's the Lord who adds and the Lord who takes away. It's got very little to do with us. The second question they often ask is, what does your church do? In other words, what sort of things define it? What is it that defines your church? What do you do? And thank God we do an awful lot, as went up on the board earlier. Loads and loads of different ministries. Were you surprised? I know I am every time I see that, how many different things go on in the church or through the ministries of the church here. I was at a Christian Aid conference, Christian Aid symposium. I go a couple of times a year, and I'm part of a group of people who deal with the activism in Christian Aid, and it's a bit of a think tank, how to deploy activism in a most powerful way. But I want to sort of start off this morning by making a statement, and I hope you'll understand this, is that although it involves activism, it's not about activism what we do here. We are not primarily a performing church, although thank God when we perform and understand performance, we don't say to people it's not a performance. It is a performance, but it's a performance to Jesus. And you're part of that performance. It's a joint performance, what we do here on a Sunday, to Jesus. As long as we keep that good, then we have excellence in what we do, and we also keep our focus. But we're not primarily a performing church. We're not primarily a protesting church. By nature, I would be very happy. When I was at college, my nickname was the old reactionary. And if there was something to protest about, I would be there. But we're not primarily a protesting church. We're not even primarily a preaching church, although we do some of that too. We are primarily a practicing church. A practicing church, because it's out of the practice of these spiritual disciplines, those spiritual practices which anchor us, that everything else flows. Out of that, we can be amazing in performance. You may even be on stage, as an actor or something. We've got actors and people from that sort of thing. We've got musicians in the church who make their business, their job is performing and stuff. If you're anchored in the presence of God and in the practices, then your performance will be infused with the power of God and the glory of God, and you won't get carried away and lose yourself in the hype. If you're anchored in the practice, then your protest will stop you. You'll protest, you'll be effective, but you won't just be an angry person on a street corner. So I want to look at this question about what is our practice. And in a sense, it's a bit of a recap of some of the things we've been looking at before the big move into here, because I want to get it back into our vocabulary. It's very easy to preach about something and we forget about it and we don't apply it into our lives. It's very interesting that if you're with pastors, one of the first things they'll say is, what does your church do? If you've got friends who are into the New Agey movement and all that sort of thing, one of the things they're going to ask your spiritual friends, they'll say, what's your practice? And I think that in some ways they've caught hold of something that the church has often forgotten, is that it's all about the practice, stupid. It's all about our practice. It's not about what we say with our lips, and Jesus was really big on this. You know, I'm a red-letter Christian. I love the fact that in my Bible, the words of Jesus are in red. I love that, because to me, the words of Jesus are far more important than everything everybody says about the words of Jesus. And the words in red is very interesting, is that they are not about performance, and they're not particularly about protest. They're not even particularly about preaching. They're about practice. They're about what we do. They're about the Jericho Road. They're about reaching out to the person next to you, to the immediate day-to-day experience of your life, and how to turn that and make it a prayer to the Lord. What is your practice? And when we get to heaven, according to the parable of the sheep and the goats, the Lord's going to question us on our practice, on what we did, how we set ourselves up. Jesus says, you'll come in that day and say, Lord, Lord, and he'll say, depart from me, I never knew you. And then out of that flows the acts of the church. So I want to ask the question this morning. I have 7 points. We started late. We will finish late. I want to quickly go through these 7 points which are important to us, 7 practices which define us as a church, 7 practices which enable us to live lives which are godly, which are happy, which are contented, and which are effective for Jesus. I was down my allotment the other day and had a bit of a wake-up call when I spoke to the guy next to me, in the allotment next to me, and he said, what did you do at the weekend? I said, we've moved into our new building, and I got out my photos, and I'm showing him photos, and you know, he was sort of, oh yeah, that's really good. And then he looked at me and he said, so how are your carrots getting on? And that was a kind of a bit of a wake-up call. Not everything that's important to us is important to them. Actually, what's more important to him right now is the state of his carrots. And to enter his world, if I'm going to win him to my world, that's a world I have to enter. So the first practice for our godly, happy, contented, productive lives is the practice of peace. Philippians 4 verse 7 says this. May the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. May the peace of God, which passes all understanding, the practice of peace. Now, we've talked about these things and we've labeled them as ways or disciplines. I want to label them as practices because it's something we have to do consistently. As a kid growing up, my uncle gave me a trumpet, my Uncle Peter. He's still alive, still living in the area, and he gave me his old trumpet. And I'm not sure whether this trumpet was a blessing or a curse, because I started playing it, and my mum and dad picked up on that and said, that's wonderful, you should go and learn this at school. So I took my trumpet along to school, and they started teaching me. And little did I see coming that within a couple of weeks, my mum and dad said to me, right now, you're going to have to practice the trumpet. which meant at 7 o'clock in the morning, my practice time was between 7 o'clock in the morning and 8 o'clock in the morning. We had very, very generous neighbors. And between 7 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the morning, I used to play my trumpet and practice and practice and practice and practice this trumpet. And then I used to go to school with my lips looking like I had been Botoxed and get all sorts of grief from the kids at school. Because once you've been from, Matt knows what I'm talking about, this sort of puckered look. The practice. So the first practice, we gotta practice this practice of peace. Now, when we think of peace these days, as immediately we talk about retreat, we think of a spa day, don't we? The practice of peace, and we're sitting there, and somebody's putting hot rocks on us. Not quite sure where that came from. and we've got the misty sort of mystical music playing in the background. And we're at peace. Now, that's the enjoyment of peace. What I'm talking about is the practice of peace, which is very much harder. The practice of peace is what happens when you're out of the spa. You see, a Christian is one who practices peace with God. He practices peace with others. She practices peace with herself. Have you ever thought about that? That peace is something you have to practice with yourself. I mean, staying at peace with your neighbor is one thing, but unless you're at peace with yourself, you'll never be able to be at peace with your neighbor, with the people around you. The people around you tread on your toes. Have you noticed that if you've had a bad night's sleep and you wake up and you're a little bit grumpy, that people seem to tread on your toes a lot more, and that when they do, you snap at them an awful lot more? When you're at peace, when you're at rest within yourself, you're queuing up at the post office and there's somebody in front of you and they're taking their time and you're getting angry and you're like, I've got to get on. And then you go on holiday and you go to the bar, you're going to get an ice cream. There's 3 people in front of you, they're chatting. You're cool, you're chilled, the sun's out, your shoes are off, you're happy, it doesn't matter. No, go on, you go first. Go on, it's okay. It's a lovely day, isn't it? Yeah, it's great. See, we're at peace, we're at rest in our souls. Being at rest in our souls means that we're at rest with everybody else. But we have to practice our preach and preach our practice. Don't preach our theory. See, Jesus talked about this stuff, but he actually lived it. Irritable, crabby, religious zealots don't attract kids around them, and Jesus attracted kids around him all the time. He attracted ordinary people, not religious people. Ordinary people just flocked to him. And I think the reason is because he was just chilled. You want to know the secret of Rick Warren's church? I went to Rick Warren's church 15 years ago, something like that. And I was amazed at this. I hadn't seen Rick Warren in person before, and they did this fantastic time of worship. There's 8,000 people in this auditorium, and Rick Warren pads up on stage in a pair of board shorts, bare feet, and a Hawaiian shirt, very similar to this, but with the board shorts, and opens his Bible and just starts talking to people. And I thought, man, that's the sort of person which I can relate to. He wasn't somebody who was beating me over the head with an extension of his own internal frustrations. He was somebody who was profoundly at peace with himself. He was practicing peace. One of the best things you can do is to take the time to practice peace before you go to work. And you'll be at peace with everybody else, and everybody else will enjoy your peace. Jesus said, "Peace I give to you, my peace I give to you." See, the Lord gives it to me, I give it to you. I can't give you somebody else's peace. I can only give you my peace. So we practice peace. The second practice, which is a kind of obvious one, is the practice of prayer. And those two are linked. In Philippians 4, it says, "Be careful, or we will be worried about nothing. But let's go back a verse. Verse 5, verse 4. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say, rejoice. Let your moderation be known to all people. See, there's lots of little keys. They all link together. This moderation, or let your simplicity of lifestyle be known to all men. The Lord is at hand, so be careful for nothing. But in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, not prayer and supplication with whinging, let your requests be known to God, and the peace of God, which passes all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds. There's this connection between prayer and peace. Our road, there's a bit of a internecine war going on at the moment. There's a certain person moved into the road and has built, is in the process of building a fortress around their house. And there's trucks up and down the road, and oh my goodness. And in the process has managed to irritate the entire road. And there's been it's open warfare. And I was around one of the people's house the other day, and they were saying about how they just had a huge ding-dong with this neighbour. And so is that an incorrect phrase? Okay, a huge argument, is that? They didn't have a ding-dong. No, I could be sued for that, couldn't I? They had an argument with the neighbour. And I was talking to them, and I said, because I'm the chairman of the Residents Association, and they said, but it's okay, because you're a minister, and it's going to be your job to get us all talking to each other again. So thank you very much. So, the whole thing of peace, blessed are the peacemakers. So here's the source of it, is our prayer life. Our prayer life. Now, our prayer life is a prayer of peace. If our prayer life is always that kind of, oh God, smash the teeth of the wicked. Lord, I pray that the wall that they're building around their house will come crashing down. In Jesus' name. If we're doing that, we're not going to be at peace, right? I wish it would come crashing down, but that's never. So our prayers fuel the rest of our lives. To be a prayer of peace, a prayer for peace. I was reading a book the other day about Peace Pilgrim. Anybody heard about Peace Pilgrim? Peace Pilgrim is an American woman. She died about 15, 20 years ago. And during the Vietnam War, she was a young lady, and she was terribly opposed to the Vietnam War and what it was doing and the effects it was having. And so she just sold everything, took the words of Jesus literally, sold everything she had, and all she had was a small backpack. She had no support team or anything, and the clothes on her back, and she had Peace Pilgrim printed across her clothes. And she just started walking across America by foot, no support, nothing, just accepting food and so on as she went somewhere. Now, bear in mind, this was before the internet, before any mobile phones or anything. And people who loved peace would invite her to stay, but often she would sleep by the side of the road, and often she would go hungry. But she became a bit of a celebrity in the end and ended up speaking to the United Nations and speaking to Congress. Peace Pilgrim, a very ordinary woman who ended up traversing across America 7 times in the course of her life. And on the 8th time, she was tragically run over. But this life of a woman who just spoke peace. In a sense, she was a Gandhi of the Americas, written out of social history, partly because she was perhaps a woman at the wrong time. Today, she may have had her name a little bit more up in lights, but at that time, she was just this crazy female hippie. But today, being rediscovered as one of the great peace activists of the 20th century. The practice of peace and the practice of prayer are intimately linked. All religions agree. Every religion in the world agrees that prayer is one of the great keys to spiritual growth. It's interesting when we talk about spiritual practice. that almost all the religions in the world agree on almost all the points of what is spiritual practice. Prayer, fasting, other spiritual disciplines. You can think of the idea of community, the ideas of simplicity. They all preach these. Now, they differ in terms of how they relate and their relationship to God and so on and so forth. But they agree on this, that without prayer there can be no spiritual growth. We often think in terms, because of the Western world, that the practice of the discipline of prayer, the practice, when we practice prayer, it's about going to God with a long list. But the bulk of prayer, when Paul says pray without ceasing, he's not saying have a never-ending list you're bringing towards God. He's saying that the prayer is that prayer of contemplation and the prayer of silence and the prayer which positions your spirit in the presence of God 24/7. And when we have that, we call it contemplation. Contemplation. And see, contemplation brings insight. Contemplation brings penetration. It enables you to penetrate through the outer reality, that matrix that we see, touch, taste, and hear. It enables to penetrate through that and understand what is the real nature of reality. And that's what's so transformative about prayer, is we start seeing things the way God sees them. But in order to do that, we have to practice prayer. And to practice prayer, all the other practices line up and stand or fall together. To practice prayer without practicing simplicity is not just hard, I think it's largely impossible. To practice prayer without practicing community is largely impossible. All these things knit and hold together and lean upon each other. So if we're going to, as we contemplate, as we use that practice of contemplation to not think deeply about the world, but to allow our hearts to eat, to nourish, to feed on all that which God gives us to teach about himself. To feed on that produces this quality of penetration, being able to see through what is this matrix and see reality the way it is. It brings transformation. Second practice of the practicing church, peace. We practice it. When somebody rubs you up the wrong way, practice it. You practice it. Practice. It's an opportunity for practice. I don't want to play my trumpet for an hour in the morning. It's an opportunity to practice. Somebody's just irritated you. It's an opportunity to practice peace, to practice prayer. Thirdly, the practice of compassion. The practice of compassion. Many times, Jesus, it's said of him, and he had compassion on them. He had compassion on them. And then he did something. But what he did came out of compassion. The word compassion literally means of a similar pain, or to share pain. Passion, we think of passion as being, what a passionate night with a wife. But the word passion actually comes from the word pain. And that's all I'm saying about that. So is pain. So we talk about the passion of our Lord Jesus Christ, his death. It's about pain. Compassion means to share the pain of another. And that flows out of insight. It flows out of understanding that the matrix that we live in will teach us dualism. It will teach that you are different to me, that I am here and you are there, that there's a wall between us, that we're not interrelated and interlinked at all, that we're somehow different. But the practice of prayer will give us that insight which will transform that thinking, so we start seeing the world in a non-dual way. We start seeing, instead of your being and my being, we see interbeing. We see a connection. It's interesting that even in physics now, it's proving this. We look at our bodies and we think that I stop here and you start there. Elliot's body starts there. It's where his skin begins, and certainly the skin is largely impervious to water and stuff like that, but at the atomic level it doesn't. In a sense, we live in almost a cloud that gradually solidifies, but we are largely just space between us. At an atomic level, there's very, very little difference between me and this lectern and this stage and you. There is air all around me. I breathe it in. It permeates my skin. The atoms flow straight through me and out the other side. That's how X-rays work. We see things as being solid where there is no solidity. And as we pray and as we spend time in God's presence, we gain this into being, this insight that we actually, everything in the universe leans on everything else for its existence. Left leans on right. If I pulled out a £5 note, if I was to take one side of that £5 note away, I've taken the other side away as well. I cannot take left away without demolishing right. Do you understand? If I take a stick and I cut off the left, and I keep cutting off the left, in the end I have no right. We think that black can exist without white, or white can exist without black, but they interbeing, they lock together. They don't just lean on each other, they connect and they merge. We think we can live without the trees, but we've now discovered that the trees give us our air. We lean on the trees, and the trees lean on us. They require our carbon dioxide. We require their oxygen. There's an interbeing here. There's a connection with every single living being and non-living being, increasingly we're discovering, on the planet and off the planet in the whole universe. Perhaps you might be Labour here, you might be Conservative, you might be left, you may be right. Don't yearn too hard for the destruction or the elimination of the right wing, because you're praying for your own elimination. It requires it both. You lean on each other. Male and female lean on each other. They require each other. They inter-are. If you take female out of the way, you've got no male anymore. If you had a world which was all just men, there'd be no babies. We'd kill ourselves and would stink. We inter-are. There's this connection. And it's that which one of the great revelations we get in prayer. And that is what creates compassion. I recognize I am not feeling sorry for you. When I feel sorry for you, it's me feeling sorry for you. Compassion means that your pain is my pain. When one is exalted, the scripture says all is exalted. When one is laid low, all is laid low. When one is hungry, your hunger is my hunger, is what the Bible teaches. Jesus says, as you do it to the least of my brethren, you do it to me. The practice of compassion flows out of the practice of prayer. The fourth practice that the practicing church or any practicing community practices is the practice of joy. Let's go to Psalm 16. Psalm 16. I love this verse 11. Psalm 16, verse 11. You will show me the path of life, and in your presence there is fullness of joy. You will show me the path of life, and in your presence is fullness of joy. I see there's a connection here between life and joy. There's a connection here between life and happiness. At root, all human beings want to be happy. Every part of creation just wants to be happy. They want to be at rest. They want to be at peace. They want to know compassion. They want to know joy. We used to sing a hymn, there is joy unspeakable and full of glory. Remember, full of glory, full of glory. Unspeakable and full of glory, but the half has never yet been told. It's great. We used to sing it. Joy unspeakable and full of glory, full of glory. If you're a Pentecostal, you knew better. You did it like this. I never did understand why such a conservative group as the Pentecostals morally did the can-can while they worshipped. I never got that. The principle of joy. The principle of joy. Joy is, I'm convinced, joy is the natural condition of the reborn human heart. I'm utterly convinced misery is your construction. It's you've engineered that. It's your creation. It's my creation. Right now, the now is always joyful. It is. It is. It's our past that makes us miserable. The worries of our past. See, this is why we have to have compassion on ourselves, because all of us have got enough in our past. If it was constantly played over, and some of us have got psychologists that do this, they're constantly playing over and playing over and playing over all the things in your past that you shouldn't have done, or where you messed up, or where you wish you'd done that differently. And you've got to have compassion on yourself and say, if you haven't got compassion on yourself like that, you're going to be an irritable what's-it to everybody else, because everybody else has a past as well. To be able to forgive someone else their past, you have to receive the forgiveness of Jesus for your past. I don't care where you've been. I don't care what you've done. I don't care where you've been sleeping. I don't care. I don't care what your past is. I don't care what yesterday was. All I'm interested in is, what are you doing today? What are you doing right now? And right now, every one of us can say, it is good. It is well with my soul. I love that Nigerian thing, you know, where you're going through stuff and you say something, they say, how is it? And you turn and they say, it's well. It's well. It's well. Now, it's nice if they mean it, you know, if they mean it. And that can be, you know, I've been terrible. Don't worry, it's well. You know, you've been there as well. But I love it when people, you know, mean that, and it's well, it's well, it's well, it's well. When Satan should buffet, when trials should come, let this blessed assurance control. It is well with my soul. It's not well with my throat. Honey, can you have compassion on me? Thank you. Have a little drink of your bottle, thank you. She shares her bottle. I'll keep it up there. No, you better take it. It's pink. It doesn't go well with a sword. Where are we? Joy, joy, joy. Close your eyes. Let's do this. Let's do this. Okay, now if you've got bare feet, just put them on the ground. Just close your eyes. Now, we're not going to the past. Don't worry about the future. Now, we're going to practice some joy. So just breathe. Nice deep breath. I want to show you that joy is the natural position of the human heart. Deep breath. And just show gratitude to the Lord. Be grateful in your heart that you can breathe. Wow. It's coming a time when you won't be able to, but I can breathe. I've got food in my stomach. I'm not hungry. And if you are hungry, we'll feed you after this service. So you don't need to be worried about that. Now put a smile on your face. Turn that frown upside down. Just smile. I'm not asking you to be happy. I'm asking you to smile. Now that's hard for some, but let's give it a go, shall we? Just smile. That's it. My mum always used to tell me, don't smile for photos. You look dreadful when you smile. It's always a cheesy smile. Just smile. Nobody's looking. No photos being taken. Don't think about the past. Don't think about the future. Just your feet on that nice, cool floor. You've got hundreds of friends around you. find there's joy inside you? Of course you do. It's there. It's always there. It's always there. It's never absent. Your home is a joyful home. Your home inside where the Lord comes to dwell. He says, I'm going to come and dwell inside you. It's home and it's joyful. I'm here. I've arrived. I'm home and it's joyful. And then your brain kicks in and says, oh yeah, but what about the past and what about the future? Just go back home. The practice of joy. How do you practice joy with each other? Well, the smile you got on your face now, you can give it as a gift to somebody. Turn around and smile at everybody you can. Just give them a big smile. That's it. Just smile. Smile though your heart is breaking. Smile though the cake is baking. Amen. It's great, isn't it? It's so easy. It's so easy, this stuff. This is kids' stuff. It's so easy. We really want to learn about Melchizedek. Forget Melchizedek. Smile. Here we go. Fifth one, practice of humility. We all get through these. Practice of humility. Galatians 2:20 says this. Galatians 2:20 says, I have been crucified with Christ. Yet I live, but not I, but Christ who lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith of the Son of God. It's not even your faith. It doesn't say faith in the Son of God. I live by the faith of the Son of God. It's his faith that keeps me, who loved me and gave himself for me. Now, why did I use this scripture to talk about humility? Because humility is what happens when you disentangle the fruit of your action from the action itself. When you disentangle the fruit of action from the action itself. Jesus talked about this all the time. He said, don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing. Give and don't expect anybody to give back to you. Don't expect a return on it. Just give. You see, he's teaching us to disentangle the fruit of action. So from the action from the fruit. So we do something with no hope, no expectation of return. We do something simply because it's the correct thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It's the loving thing to do. It's the compassionate thing to do. I do something because of that. Now, if I don't get a return, see, if I lend you 20 quid and I expect that 20 quid to come back, if it does come back, I get no joy out of that because I lent it to you and you've given me back what's due mine. If I give it to you and you don't give it back, I get stressed and I get angry. I'm no more likely to get it back from you if I'm stressed and angry than if I'm joyful. But if I give it to you and I detach myself from the giving to the any expectation of fruit, then I'm doubly joyful. Firstly, I'm blessed as a giver. I've given with no expectations of return. I've given, and in that sense, I've given to God. If you don't give it back to me, I'm full of joy because I wasn't expecting it back. If you do give it back to me, I'm doubly full of joy because I wasn't expecting it back. Sam and Josh, this doesn't apply to you. You see, we disentangle ourselves from that. I sow my cabbage, right? I sow my cabbage because it's the correct thing to do. That's what I do each year, sow my cabbage. Now, if I'm going to start crying because the slug eats one of my cabbage, no, don't get me wrong, I'm going to try and make sure the slugs don't eat my cabbage. But by detaching myself from the outcome, I've detached myself from most of the sources of our suffering. And when we do that with each other, we start miraculously, and I'm still not sure why it works, we start developing humility. When Jesus washed the disciples' feet, even in his brain, he wasn't thinking, now I wonder if they're going to still relate to me as master or whether they're going to see me as servant. He wasn't all caught up with the neuroses of it. He was just doing what needed to be done. The feet needed to be washed. I'll wash the feet, right? The cake needs to be baked. I'll bake the cake. The barbecue needs to be made on the beach. I'll do the barbecue on the beach. Whatever needs to, the word says, whatever your hand finds you to do it with all your heart. You've detached the I out of the action. Paul says, ego, has been crucified with Christ. Therefore, nevertheless, I live, but not I, not ego, but Christ who lives in me. In other words, what I do now, I do through Christ, by Christ, and for Christ. Therefore, I don't look for the reward. Now, that is so hard in our society, which is reward orientated. We've grown up with that from the cradle. But to be able to detach that is a wonderful, wonderful thing. We understand then that it is not I, but Christ. And Christ is in you just as much as he's in me. So Christ is now a community action. It's not about me. I was down the allotment the other day and I was planting strawberries. And I bought little strawberry plants. And I was planting them out, and as I was planting them out, I was talking to them, as you should do. And I'm planting that, I'm saying, oh, little plant, you're going to grow for me. And I was singing to it a little bit and just planted this plant. And it just came to me as a revelation that the soil I was putting around it was simply the living, which was now dead. Huh? Except it's not dead because it's living soil. You know, a dead soil is not going to grow anything. And so I'm planting down like this, and I'm planting around it. And the revelation, this was the revelation, how it went. You're going to sound mad, but in a normal situation, I wouldn't be burying my dead in the cemetery a million miles away. You plant them on your land. That land gets used again and again and again. I would be literally planting my strawberry plants in my ancestors, right? Because when you and I die, what happens to our bodies? It just decomposes into earth, yeah? Very, very fertile earth. So it decomposes into earth. So you put the strawberry plant in, and I'm literally, that strawberry plant, which is going to produce strawberries that nourish me, is itself being nourished by the thousands and thousands of generations that have gone before, literally. And one day I'm going to die, and I'm going to become the earth that nourishes the strawberry plant that feeds my great-great-grandchildren. Isn't that a miracle? Isn't that amazing? That's just basic biology. You learn that in first grade, right? But it's just hit me as that, wow, that's amazing. And it's that sort of revelation that gives you this understanding of humility. I'm just dust that God's breathed into. I'm just a bit of dirt. We're so allergic to dirt, aren't we? We want to get it off our body. Do you know your body is only 45% of your body is even human cells. 55% of the cells in your body are not even human. Now, I know you look at your kids and think they're aliens. But they're not, it's not even human. It's all the other microbes and things which are hitching a ride in your body. Very, very humbling. The sixth practice that we practice is this practice of simplicity. Acts 2:46. Let me read to you this out of the ERV. I have no concept of what the ERV version is, but I've never seen it before. But I saw it this morning online with multiple translations, and I thought, well, this is such a beautiful translation of Acts 2:46. Listen to this. The believers shared a common purpose, and every day they spent much of their time together in the temple area. Let me read that again. I think you missed it. The believers shared a common purpose, and every day they spent much of their time together in the temple area. They also ate together in their homes. They were happy to share their food and ate with joyful and simple hearts. What a wonderful, wonderful community to belong to. The practice of simplicity, a gentle footprint, not leaving mess for the next generation. You know, we're trying to clean up the mess this generation's left already, aren't we? How we choked the oceans and killed the forests and destroyed everywhere we go. And, we had to turn that car park in order to be here, turn that car park there into a parking lot. Literally paved paradise and put up a parking lot. What's the practice of simplicity? The practice of simplicity is a life which is simple, sustainable, shared, and slow. Those four things. Simple, sustainable, shared, and slow. You take any one of those out, the whole thing collapses. If you run at a pace, you're running too fast, you don't have time to be sustainable. You don't have time for compassion. You don't have time for simplicity. You don't have time for sharing. Simple, sustainable, shared, and slow. See, Gandhi said, "It's my life is my message. My life is my message." The day-to-day way I live has to be our message as a church. What people see, not people hear, not our performance, not our preaching, not our protesting, but our day-to-day life. What our neighbours think about us, how our friends relate to us, how the rest of the world views us as a church. Somebody said to me, had a meeting the other week, and somebody said to me, another pastor, he said, how are you going to, he'd just seen around this place, he said, how are you going to keep momentum going? How are you going to keep it? How are you going to get bigger, better, faster from this? I said, we have no intention of it. We have no intention of it whatsoever, because I don't see that in nature. I don't see summers that get hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and never ever revert to winters. I don't see snow which starts falling, continues falling for 20 weeks continually. I don't see days that get longer and longer and longer and longer and longer and longer perpetually. No, there's this cycle, this rhythm, this simple rhythm that by understanding and getting some penetration into the world around us, seeing what's around us, understanding what this reality is all about, changes everything. Lack of it will kill us and kill the next generation. The practice of simplicity. I bought some seeds just the other day, carrot seeds, and I started doing some research on these, and they were called F1 hybrids, and I didn't know what an F1 hybrid. I got it because I thought Formula One. Oh, come on, going to grow really fast. And I got these carrots and I planted them. They were meant to resist flies and stuff like that. So, and I started researching about it. And there's basically two sorts of seeds. Please don't switch off. There's two sorts of seeds. There's seeds which are hybrids. They're called F1 hybrids. And there's seeds which are open pollination seeds. Now, at some point, we thought that we got all these problems with seeds not growing, so we created these hybrid seeds, which are much more likely to grow. You're going to get a much better produce from them. So we went from a simple system. One person I was watching a YouTube clip of, and this person, his beans, and he's got acres of beans, he said it was my great-great-grandmother, that these beans are directly descended from the beans my great-great-grandmother planted. And when she died, she left a box of beans, to the next generation, and every generation has done it. He said, we haven't paid for seeds, for beans, for generations. Now, F1 hybrid seeds, which are becoming increasingly popular, they will produce better beans. It's a technological solution. And that's wonderful, but the problem is that because it costs so much to produce this seed, they don't want you sowing that seed and then getting seeds and storing seeds when the beans go to seed for next year. They want you to keep going back to the manufacturers saying, please, sir, can I have some more seeds? Can I have some more seeds? And the way they do that is these seeds don't produce more seeds. Once they've produced the beans, you can leave the bean for another 10 years. It will not go to seed. You have to keep going back to the person who made the seed. Now, that sounds great in this country, but you start thinking what that does in the third world, where we won't buy beans from the third world unless they're hybrids, because we like the look of them, we like the taste of them, we like the fact that they're perfect. And the generations of people that have been farming in the two-thirds world, farming out of the seed banks that have been left from the generation, they now have to, in order to sell to the West, they now have to go to the seed bank and pay exorbitant amounts of money, which they've borrowed from the World Bank, and able to get seeds to put beans on our table and keeps them in poverty. You see, simplicity turns all this around and says, no, I want to live a simple, sustainable, shared, slow life. Our life is our message, friends. And finally, the practice of community, the practicing church. Somebody said that building community forces us to confront the fears and judgments that caused us to withdraw from community in the first place. All over the world, all over the Western world, this huge drive back towards community, recognizing that our independence has killed and is killing Western civilization. The practicing church, the practice of peace, the practice of prayer, the practice of compassion, the practice of joy, the practice of humility, the practice of simplicity, the practice of community. To practice faith, to become whole as a human being, I need you. And you poor sods, you need me. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Lord, we thank you for your blessings to us. We thank you for bringing us to this place. But it's our intention to be a church that practices what we preach and preaches only what we practice. In Jesus' name, amen.